Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jingyi Chen, a software developer engineer working on AWS SDK for Ruby. Today, I'm really excited to talk about how to migrate your Ruby on Rails application to AWS Fargate platform using the tool we built called aws-rails-provisioner. Before we dive into each topic, I'd like to quickly overview the agenda for today. First, we will start with what is this tool called AWS Rails-provisioner, and I would love to share its current status with you as well. Then we will talk about how to use this tool, how does this tool works under the hood for you, so that you can understand better when you are actually using the tool. Then we will talk about why you might be considering using this tool, and we'll be ending with Q&A sections. First of all, what is AWS Rails-provisioner? It is a command line tool that helps you to define and deploy a containerized Ruby on Rails application on AWS. We are trying to make it a really simple and easy experience for you to bring your app running on AWS. It's currently under developer preview, which means we are under active feature development and could be containing breaking changes when we are finally making this to GA. Currently is supporting AWS Fargate as the compute platform owning. Though in the long run, we are definitely trying to picturing this tool as an easy-to-use command line tool to support more compute platforms and even more web application frameworks. A little bit recap of what we have talked so far. Imagine that you have a Rails application, which is containerized, running locally on your local host. You want to bring this up to AWS, running it in the cloud. AWS Rails Provisioner is the tool that's trying to help you do that. We are trying to make the experience as simple as possible so that you don't need to spend a lot of efforts trying to onboarding yourself with every details on AWS services or resources. You might be wondering why we are starting with AWS Fargate as the compute platform here. AWS Fargate, the service, is an awesome platform that allows you to run containers without having to manage servers or clusters. This means you really enjoy the serverless style in the container world. This also means that as a developers, you don't need to spend operational efforts in like say OS patchings, host patchings, operational load like that for actual hosts or instance. Before we begin how to use this tool and bit more like how does this tool work, there are some topics that you will also be super interested but not be covered in today's webinar due to they are not our main focus today. Great, let's start to knowing AWS Rails provisioners. So there are three important things that you need to know about AWS Rails provisioner, and this is how we made the things simpler for you. One is you need to start with a single configuration file, which is multi-line long, defining your cloud infrastructure. You shouldn't be expecting this grow into 100 line of file, but really high-level definitions for your infrastructure. Don't need to worry about this right now. We will go through the details about writing this file shortly. Secondly, AWS Rails Provisioner is a command line tool that supports two main commands. One is build, one is deploy. We will also demo and show how this works shortly also. A deeper information about how AWS Rails Provisioner is working under the hood for you is it is a tool built on top of AWS Cloud Development Kit, which we call AWS CDKs in the rest of this webinar. It is generating AWS CDK stacks on your behalf based on the single configuration file that you have defined earlier. We will also work through demos, what are those generated stacks looks like, and how does it works in AWS consoles. Let's start with this configuration file. I will going to do a quick demo for the commands before coming back to this file so that we can actually see the commands working since it will take a while. You can see here in my terminal, I have a directory with two Rails applications living in their own directory. And I also have an example configuration file here. You can see this is pretty much similar to what we have talked so far. Then I will go run those commands first. Then we will talk more details about it. AWS Rails Provisioner. Let's make the font bigger. Let's run the build command first. Build command is actually doing the code generations for starting from creating an AWS CDK workspace to AWS CDK stacks. We'll take a look at the generated artifacts later. Let's first focus on this configuration file. You can see here, it is starting with the networking configurations, which is AWS VPC. It can go as simple as these two configurations, or even just one configurations, saying if you want to enable DNS resolutions for your VPCs or not. What this do under the hood is actually defining all the routing tables, subnets, CIDR blocks, all the details for you under the hood. So you don't need to worry about those details if you don't need them. Then let's take a look at one Rails application example. First, you are pointing out what are the local directory that AWS Rails Provisioner can build your first image from. Here is the Fargate service definition. Fargate service definition is mainly focused on your container definitions, such as what environment variables you want to have for your container or image to run, what's the memories, what's the CPUs, whether you want your applications to be public or not, how many tasks you want Fargate to run for you for loading your applications. Next, for Rails applications that actually talking to a relational database, you need to give some simple configurations for your database cluster as well. You just need to pick the database engine that you will be using. For example, Aurora MySQL, AWS RDS, Aurora Postgres, or other DB engines that you might be using. You also need to provide a database name so that AWS Rails Provisioner know what the database is when you're starting to build and provisioning the resources. Second, when we are talking about real-world web applications, we are definitely considering scaling and scale-out policies. AWS Rails Provisioner also allows you to define that in a very self-explanatory way. You can see here, I'm doing scaling and scale-out based on CPUs. You can definitely doing this based on memories, based on metrics, or based on time schedules. We all support that. Finally, you will notice since I have multiple Rails applications defined, I can define another Rails application here too. Let's take a look about how our build commands doing. Yeah, you can look our build finished. You can see from terminal log here, it actually doing the code generation for those CDK stacks. Don't need to worry about those right now. We'll take a look for this later. And you can see it also run the CDK build for you to make sure your code passed the first verifications for those resources build. Let's run the deploy command first. Okay, since deploy will take a while, let's go back to our slide first. We have just covered how to write this one configuration file. You can see that it feels very similar to Docker Compose YAML file if you have ever testing a Docker applications locally to make sure your app is working as expected. AWS Rails Provisioner is also trying to provide a simple experience there so that you can focus on those main components for your web app infrastructures, such as compute platforms or DBs or some scaling configurations. Of course, it still provides you the flexibility, saying if you want to configure more details you would like. We have just briefly mentioned those two commands, but I want to do a bit more explanation there. For AWS Rails Provisioner build command, it is doing the code generation for AWS CDK stacks and build those resources as templates. When you are running the deploy commands, this is where actual AWS resources start to provisioning. And actually, you can see those taking effect in the CloudFormation console. The help command is also available for AWS Rails Provisioner as the tool. You can see with those two main commands, you still have a bunch of other options. You can pick the service, which is, for example, you just want to run build or deploy for one of the Rails applications that you configured. You can also pick the AWS profile that you want to use when you're doing the build and deploy. You can also configure some few other options if you want to do this step by step instead of all at once. Let's take a quick look for how our deploy command is doing. Yeah, you can see here, if you have ever used AWS CDK before, this is pretty much similar to the CDK output. You can see it's doing the provisioning through AWS CloudFormation. And if you have no diff for pre-deployed resources, it also shows that too. And you can see now it's actually building the image for you and computing the rest of the provisioning. Let's take a look at our console to see what's happening there. You can see here, we log into AWS console. Let's go to CloudFormation first to see what resources is happening here. Let's see the things in progress. Let's see everything here. Let's go back to, since it's still building, let's give it some minutes before it's showing up in the console. Yeah, you can see it's starting creating CloudFormation transits. Now we should be able to detect this. Yeah, you can see it's now in progress. Let me show you some example stacks I have deployed earlier. Let me go to ECS, looking at the Fargate cluster that you will be getting once you complete the deployment. You can see it creating a Fargate cluster. You have your service here, and you have tasks running inside of it. Since I have made the task public, you can also see the logs, just normal Rails server logs. Let's see the app to see it is working publicly. Go to the application, you will see that it also created the application load balancer fronting this app. Let's go to this load balancer. You can see how target is healthy, is doing the healthy checks. You also have those monitoring metrics as well, if you are interested. Let's see the load balancer. From here, let's go to the address. Go to the correct DNS results. You can see this is the welcome page for Rails app that everyone will start with. Cool. Let's see. We have a quick walkthrough from the console to see the app is running on AWS. Let's go a bit deeper to see what has AWS Rails-provisioner actually built for you under the hood. You will notice in the same directory it's actually generating those CDK workspaces for you. Starting with an initial stack, which is defining all the networking configurations, starting from a VPC networks with subnets configurations. Then it will also starting with initial Fargate cluster, which will be later in hosting all your Fargate service. Let's take a look at an example Fargate stack. Since this is a Rails app talking to a relational databases, it will starting with the database definitions. You can see it's generating service from AWS Circuit Manager on your behalf. It also handling all the database parameters groups for you. Then it's building the images, defining the ECR repositories that will be hosting your image before it's creating a Fargate service. For the Fargate service, it's also creating an application load balancer and taking all the configurations that you might have and handles the DB connections as well. There is an example for Rails app without databases. You can see it's pretty much similar, but without the database configurations. You can see our deployments is still happening and resources keeping being generated. Provisioning is going well. Just give it a few minutes. So we are at a point where our application is running on the cloud. What is the next step? Once you have been starting with developing your web applications, you really want to figure out a way to do CI/CDs. which means every time you commit a new change to your application, it can be automatically pick up, running build, test, and deploy to your application running in the cloud so that you don't need to do all these manual steps all over again. AWS Rails Provisioner also take care of this for you. By enable CI/CD options with both build command and deploy command, you got an actual CDK stack to be generated for you, which is a CI/CD stack. It essentially contains an AWS code pipeline that starting from source stage, build stage, and deploy stage. If you are a Rails application talking to a relational database, you might also be thinking about database migrations. It also handles that for you. It will also create a code build job running migration scripts inside the same subnets where your DB cluster sits. Let's see it working in console as well. You can see it's still working here. Let's go to the code pipeline. This is a pipeline that I used Rails Provisioner created earlier. You can see this is a simple case. It is starting from a sourcing stage from an AWS code commit repository. This is where your Rails application source code lives. Whenever you started a new commit to the source, it will automatically trigger a code build at the build space. Build stage will actually run the code job to building your image. Let's take an example for that. This is essentially doing the Docker build for your applications whenever you have an update. And the artifacts is pushed to ECR. Let's go back to the code pipeline. After the build step is finished, it will be trigger a call deploy job, which is actually deploying this latest image available in ECR to updating that in Fargate task definitions, is where your web application is running. This is a simple pipeline. For Rails applications with talking to your relational databases, you will see an actual step after the build, which is database migrations. Let's also see building those CDK stacks in code. Let's open a new window and run the build. You can see here is creating an actual stack for you called pipeline stack. Let's give it a minute to build, then we will take a look at again for the CDK code being generated during the AWS code pipeline definitions. While we are waiting for the build commands, let's do a quick recap of what we have been built so far. Starting from the end user experience, their request is received by an application load balancer, which will be routing and doing the traffic loading before routing those into your Fargate service. Your Fargate service also has a defined scaling policies handled by auto-scaling. AWS Fargate contains all those services with task definitions, which boils down to your container image running your web application. Of course, your web application is also talking to databases living inside the private subnets, securely hosting your databases. Let's also recap the CI/CD pipeline as well. It always starting from a source stage, following by a build stage, which is an AWS code build job, doing the image build push tag to ECR with a commit ID, and could be followed by a data migration step, which is also handled by code build running inside the same VPC, same subnet, talking to your databases. After everything looks good, it will be triggering a deploy, which will be updating your latest image with the commit ID tag into your Fargate service. Let's take a look about how a build command is working. Here is running the build commands. Again, you can see here is creating the pipeline stacks based on the configurations. Now we can see the build finish. Let's go to see the CDK stack is actually generating. You can see now you would have the pipeline stack. Let's take a closer look at those pipeline stacks. Again, it will starting with the source stage. You can see it's an AWS code commit repository, so you can start iterating and doing feature development on your applications. It is the sourcing stage, will be followed by a build stage. Build stage here is a code build job. One cool thing that AWS Rails-provisioner provides is it also provides a sample build set for your applications, so you can directly use them for your Rails application and update it to whatever works for your own scenarios. After that, since this application has databases, it also builds a code build job for running your database migrations. You can see it's running inside the VPCs talking to your databases securely. We also have example build steps for that, so directly available for use. Finally, it will be followed by a deploy stage, doing the Fargate deployment, bring your latest image up in the cloud. Comparison to a Rails application without talking to your databases, you still have the source stage, the build stage, and the deploy stage, but not DB migrations anymore. So let's take a recap of what we have gone through so far. We really start diving into what is the tool called AWS Rails-provisioner and how does it work. We starting from drafting a single configuration file with high-level definitions for the cloud infrastructures that we are building. And then we run two commands. One is build, one is deploy to start bringing those resources provisioned on AWS to see our apps running on AWS. Then we follow by a CI/CD pipeline that enable us to continue feature developments once we have the app running on AWS. We also go to a deep dive on how AWS Rails Provisioner is working under the hood. It is building on top of AWS CDK tool. It is generating AWS CDK stacks. We have gone through the details about the generated code as well. If there is one single takeaways that I would love everyone to have after this webinar is you should build your infrastructures as code on AWS. We have a lot of options there. AWS Rails Provisioner is another layer of an infrastructure as code tool to make life easier for you to have an easier onboarding experience from a local running app to an app running on AWS. There are also other great resources available if you are interested. We also have a detailed AWS blog post with walkthroughs for using these tools, from installing, configurations, and deploying instructions. And as I slightly mentioned before, AWS Rails Provisioner is under developer preview. It is also open sourced on GitHub under AWS Labs. Feel free to check out. We would love to hear your feedback, thoughts, feature requests, or any issues you have when you are using these tools. Finally, thank you so much for joining me on today's webinar. I would love to answer questions that you might have. I have also included links there as our tool is open source on GitHub. Welcome your feedback and thoughts. And our gem is also available to download from Ruby Gems as well. Feel free to check it out locally and to see it working for your application. Thank you.